Tensions on the front line are not subsiding. It is hot along the entire line of contact. The General Staff recorded 236 combat engagements across all sectors yesterday. Our war correspondent, Jegor Romachlo, is working on the front line. He is with us live. Jegor, greetings. Please tell us in more detail what the situation is like on the front lines.
I would like to start specifically with the Oleksandrivka sector of the front, as the counter-offensive operation of our defense forces is still ongoing there. The day before, we managed to visit this very section of the front, specifically the gunners of the 148th Separate Artillery Brigade of the Air Assault Forces. Their gunners, with their precise fire, help destroy the enemy's rear positions. The Russians, in turn, respond with terror against civilians. In the frontline villages here, it is hard to find a street where there are no damaged houses. Plus, because of the occupiers' strikes, fields are constantly burning here. The smell of burning was felt throughout our entire trip. However, our warriors continue to push the Russians back from Ukrainian territory. And already now, one can confidently say that there is no enemy left on the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Please, direct speech follows.
In the Oleksandrivka direction, an active phase of offensive operations by the Air Assault Forces grouping is underway. During the operation, which began on January 29th of this year, about 745 square kilometers have been liberated and 26 settlements in the Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions have been freed. Within the administrative borders of the Dnipropetrovsk region, there is no enemy. The tactical initiative in the Oleksandrivka direction remains with the defense forces of Ukraine.
The occupiers continue to terrorize civilians in the Donetsk region as well. Just over the past day, the enemy killed 2 people in the region and wounded another 18. The victims are residents of Kramatorsk. The epicenter of the strike in the city was a Nova Poshta branch, an entirely civilian facility. Also, the Russians damaged nearly 24 private houses in Sloviansk. In total, according to the military administration, the enemy shelled the communities of the Donetsk region 27 times over the last day. Evacuation from frontline towns and villages is also ongoing. The White Angels continue their work, having recently published a video of the evacuation of civilians from Druzhkivka. Despite the pleas of law enforcement officers, constant shelling, and the lack of water and electricity, more than 3,000 people continue to remain in the city. Fortunately, this time they managed to convince a few residents of Druzhkivka. I suggest we watch the rest without commentary.
Is your house intact? It's destroyed. Was that a long time ago?
Twice. The first time was October 19th, and the second time was just this July 10th. Right into the bedroom under the window.
We covered 4 addresses in the city of Druzhkivka. At one address, they refused evacuation. And we also picked up an elderly couple right from the road. They were already waiting for us. Their house is destroyed. Now we are handing everyone over to the volunteers. From there they will go to a safer region.
Well, in the next segment, we will return to the Kupyansk direction and its defenders, the warriors of the 116th Separate Mechanized Brigade. The day before, we managed to see with our own eyes what logistics look like on this route, at what cost it happens, how complex it is, and who carries it out. Who these people are and at what cost they do this. And you will see this now in the report. Also, during the segment, you will continue to see a QR code and a card number through which you can also support the 116th Brigade's fundraiser for drone components. And I strongly urge you to join in. This logistics mission in the Kupyansk direction begins while it is still dark. The task of the soldiers of the 116th Separate Mechanized Brigade is to equip and deliver the UGV to the launch position. The first to check the safety of the route is an armored Humvee covered in netting, driven by a driver with the call sign Romachlo. The man warns right away, the road will not be easy.
You absolutely have to watch where you step because they lay mines and the mining involves improvised explosive devices.
The man has been in the military since 2025 and has already participated in dozens of such missions. This is literally a daily story because without logistics, the front line could collapse.
If we fail to carry out these critical logistics missions, well, it is going to be incredibly tough for our soldiers on the front line. It really is a matter of survival for them out there. The guys are waiting for our arrival.
Dawn is already breaking across the distant horizon, which means we really need to hurry up if we want to make it in time. A second vehicle is already moving behind the Humvee along the proven route, which will be the one to pick up the wounded. It doesn't have armor, but anti-drone nets are a mandatory accessory for all transport on the front line. But the one thing you can't protect the car from is the ruthless Ukrainian roads.
The asphalt there is just falling apart. It's easier in winter, fewer potholes.
We reached the first point, fortunately, without any incidents. Here we meet the direct executor of the mission, an RCV called Veprik, Little Boar. It sounds gentle, but don't let that mislead you. This equipment is quite sturdy and durable. It can carry from 300 kilograms to a ton of cargo, depending on the configuration. As it turned out, this particular RCV is already a service veteran and even a record holder for the longest logistics mission. But there is a nuance, Romario explains.
This RCV's mission lasted 2 months. Control was lost, and it just so happened that it drove into the thicket. There was no internet. Well, the guys pulled it out, went there and pulled it out. It was dangerous there. Well, they pulled it out, and it's still working to this day.
So it was kind of lost.
Yeah.
It was waiting until...
A little lost one.
Now the RCV needs to be delivered to the location from where its independent route will begin. Further on, the road becomes even more dangerous as we are getting closer and closer to the conditional line of contact.
Look, if suddenly, God forbid of course, there is an emergency situation, the front doors open first. Because if you open the back doors, the front ones won't be able to open.
Fortunately, we didn't need this knowledge. The Veprik and we, together with it, reached the starting location without any incidents. At the designated point, we are met by 2 more soldiers from the 116th Brigade, who are already loading the UGV with everything necessary. From the side, it looks like Tetris because equipment for several positions at once has to fit into a fairly compact cabin. But the guys, it's immediately obvious, are already very experienced in this. On top, they secure it all with a camouflage net.
And then the operator connects and immediately heads directly to the point.
He has a long road ahead.
Yes, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours.
And the Veprik sets off on its long and dangerous journey. But there are places where even the UGV cannot reach. For example, these are forward infantry positions, and that's where delivery by air comes to the rescue, specifically using heavy bombers. So, after loading the Veprik, Herman and his comrades start assembling the aerial packages. Here there is also food, water, and even drones.
We are sending drones to the position.
It depends on your speed and coordination to ensure the guys have everything.
Yes, of course, because if a position has lost a drone, then you need to somehow, make a delivery. If you don't do it on time, the position doesn't work. And the front line, for example, is left uncovered.
Everything is packed extremely carefully and secured reliably on the bird. From there, the success of the mission depends on the pilot's skill. And now the Vampire is ready for takeoff with the package. Here are provisions, food, water, everything most necessary for our defenders on the front line. And in just a few minutes, the Vampire will take to the sky. There can be up to a dozen such flights a day. The only limitation is the number of batteries for the Vampire, which take quite a long time to charge. So as soon as the equipment is ready, a new batch of supplies flies out to our defenders. And you and I can make sure there are even more of these flights by supporting the 116th Brigade Drone Operators fundraiser using the QR code and card number on the screen. These funds will go towards additional batteries for copters, generators, and other important components for UAVs. From the Kharkiv region, Igor Rimalo, Volodymyr Kovalenko, and Serhiy Marchenko. Fakti, United News Marathon.
The defense forces are preparing countermeasures against Russian plans in the Donetsk region. This was stated by the Supreme Commander-in-Chief Volodymyr Zelenskyj after a meeting with the country's top military leadership. He heard a report on the situation in Kostiantynivka and in the Pokrovsk and Sloviansk directions. He thanked all the defenders who are holding the line there and striking the enemy. Also, Acting Minister of Defense Yevhen Kamara spoke about protecting frontline communities and logistics routes from enemy drones. To fully secure everything, additional funding is needed. The President also discussed personnel decisions with Commander-in-Chief Mikhailo Drapati. The relevant decrees are already in place. Another topic is strengthening our defense on the hottest sectors. In parallel, a new program of deep strikes into the Russian rear for September has been prepared.
The priorities for deep strikes by September have already been determined. And we also spoke with Yevhen Kamara about additional finances, additional resources, and additional strikes that Ukraine needs. In addition to the kinetic sanctions of our long-range operations, we are also working on all other areas of sanctions. Today, we coordinated with intelligence agencies, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and special services regarding when and from which of our partners we expect new sanctions packages in those areas capable of limiting Russia's active military capabilities.
In Russia, at least 2 workshops producing explosives and gunpowder have been destroyed, and 4 others have been damaged. The General Staff confirmed the strike on the Kamensky plant in the Rostov region. Our defense forces carried out the operation against it the day before. At this plant, the Russians produced solid rocket fuel for Uragan, Smerch, and Tornado S MLRS ammunition, as well as for a number of missile systems and aviation. It was also restless in Russia today. Over Moscow, social media users recorded drones and the operation of local air defense. There were also explosions in the Leningrad region. There, in the city of Izhora, a drone allegedly hit warehouses where the enemy was storing ammunition. Videos are being filmed by Russians and actively shared on social media. And in parallel, the enemy has been trying for the 2nd day to extinguish a large-scale fire at one of the largest wild berries warehouses in Kolodino. This night, the defense forces struck the enemy's drone infrastructure in the occupied territory. According to the General Staff, they managed to hit several important objects at once. In Hvardivske, in occupied Crimea, a place where the enemy stored and prepared drones for launches against mainland Ukraine was on fire. And in Novofedorivka and Olenivka, a ground station and repeaters which the Russians used to control the drones were burning. Drone infrastructure also exploded in the occupied Kherson region. A communication point and power supply for a drone repeater were destroyed there on the Tendrivska spit. We are targeting exclusively military facilities, oil refineries, and logistics warehouses that are involved in supporting the war machine. They target our critical infrastructure, industrial enterprises, railways, grain elevators, ports, logistics centers, food warehouses, and publishing houses. Russia aims to deal a significant blow to our economy, destroy small and medium-sized businesses, and sow panic among the people. How can we withstand a war of attrition? What is the resilience of our economy? How can we support businesses? Olena Astakova will tell us.
August 26th will be remembered for a bitter escalation of the war in the rear. The Russians began massively striking logistics centers, terminals, and food warehouses. On the shelves of many supermarkets, there is a telling sign. These products were destroyed by Russia. The vegetable, dairy, fish, and meat sections have emptied out.
The selection is, of course, smaller. There is no cheese. I see there's a little bit there, but not the full selection. Well, otherwise it seems okay. Well, grains too. I see there are no grains either.
The rashes hit a number of distribution centers in the Kyiv region, where products of well-known retail chains were stored. Warehouses and refrigeration equipment were destroyed. Logistics problems still exist. Companies are building new supply chains. Since July, the Russians have destroyed over 400,000 square meters of logistics real estate. Empty shelves are shocking. However, experts remind us of the beginning of the Great War.
Let's recall that the year 2022 began with the destruction of gas station infrastructure. We all remember for 2.5 months we were completely without fuel with huge queues. Then the destruction of energy infrastructure, both deep in the rear and everywhere across Ukraine, and the Kyiv region was affected too. Let's recall last year's winter. Thank God that we started playing this game together.
Destroyed terminals of Nova Poshta and Rosetka and other Ukrainian and foreign companies. The destruction, unfortunately, will continue. Therefore, business and the government must learn lessons in order to continue existing.
I think businesses will look for alternative, more or less smaller-sized warehouse infrastructure. And the state probably will also have to intervene here and help businesses. This is in principle a significant risk.
We are waiting from the state for a certain list of premises that belong either to the state property fund or the army, which can be used for the logistics of these networks. Just to build a warehouse, it takes about a year. To build a professional warehouse with all the equipment, that takes years. And that is why the situation is, well, very complicated.
Currently, the Russians have targets to aim at, even by studying satellite imagery.
The enemy strikes based on the principle of a large roof. Wherever there is a large roof, that is where they strike. When we look at it, yes, it hit Kyiv, but practically every regional center has similar logistics hubs on the bypass roads, which will definitely be targets for enemy strikes. It is immediately necessary, in order not to suffer heavy losses, to decentralize the supply to them. Well, that is to ensure that the experience of Kyiv is used to its full extent and that the same mistakes are not made.
The development of aviation and long-range systems, unfortunately, has led to contactless warfare in the rear.
This leads to a war of attrition. Whoever is first, whoever's economy collapses first, whose population's morale collapses, and let's say whose supply capabilities, logistics capabilities, that is the ability to supply everything needed by the armed forces, collapses.
Non-contact warfare became especially effective during World War II, when aviation destroyed the enemy's industrial facilities. Of course, the civilian population also suffered from aerial bombardment. This happened in Vietnam, in the Iran-Iraq War, and in Syria.
This is a practice in many conflicts because it's one thing to break industrial infrastructure and quite a few losses, and actually defeats of the German war machine occurred in 1944 to 1945 due to the destruction of the factories themselves.
There is a certain difference in which objects are currently being struck. The Rushists, having plenty of means of destruction, strike not only at military targets.
We are striking their oil refineries, their military factories, their enterprises that produce either military equipment or components for military equipment or electronics that go into all types of military equipment. I would say that they are striking our infrastructure facilities, the cities where large enterprises are located.
A difficult autumn and winter are approaching. A certain margin of safety will be provided by a competitive economy and support from Europe. But our businesses, from farmers to retail chains, energy workers, book publishers, and Ukrzaliznytsia, need state support.
We need this targeted lending so that we can recover faster, restore our production, logistics, and warehouse capacities, and, well, everything else that might be destroyed.
Such cheap lending programs are the best option. There could also be insurance options. That is, for example, businesses, they contribute funds to a pool, and those who haven't suffered, right, essentially finance the compensa, finance the recovery, or some basic liquidity for those who have suffered.
During the Second World War, the home front destroyed the military power of the Nazis. Today, the Kremlin is trying to break our home front. Unfortunately, they have more resources. And now the question is not whether the home front will hold, but at what cost. Olena Astakova, Kristina Velichanska, Anna Bol, Fakti, ICTV, United News.
Russia has built a series of secret bases from which it can launch its strike drones for attacks on the territory of NATO countries. This is according to an investigation by the British publication The Telegraph. Some of these bases are already being used by the Russian Federation for strikes against Ukraine. Thanks to leaked documents and satellite imagery, it was possible to identify up to 10 new Russian bases with newly built launch pads for UAVs. We are talking about the Geran 4 and Geran 5 drones, that is jet-powered Shaheds. This is a threat to a number of NATO countries. The strike range of the drones is about 1,000 kilometers, so we are talking about such alliance countries as Turkey, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Romania, Bulgaria, and partially even Greece, Slovakia, and Hungary. Russia is intensifying strikes on Ukraine with banderols. These are small-sized cruise missiles with a powerful warhead. After the explosion, shrapnel can scatter for hundreds of meters. The Russians are terrorizing the south and east with banderols. They struck ports in Odessa, residential buildings in Kharkiv, and used them during massive attacks on Kyiv. Experts say Russia is trying to scale up production. They plan to launch such missiles not only from the sky, but also from the ground. Could this weapon become one of the primary means of Russian air attacks? And how can it be countered? A special report by Tetiana Dotsiak. This is a high-rise building that the Russians struck with a banderol. There were dead and wounded, and there have already been dozens of such strikes on the Kharkiv region. The danger of the banderol also lies in the fact that it is difficult to predict how much time there is to react, because sometimes the warning comes half an hour in advance, but often the alarm sounds only after the explosion. It has been over a month since the strike, and the residents of this building still cannot recover.
My husband was in the bathroom when it happened. He is currently suffering from severe shrapnel wounds. And as for me, I have just finished a long, difficult course of medical treatment for a concussion I sustained. And they suspected I had a hemorrhage. There are multiple pieces of shrapnel here.
Ms. Arena says she still flinches at almost every loud noise. And her neighbor Serhiy still sees his terrified daughter before his eyes. At the time of the strike, she was home alone. And although the occupiers have already used almost their entire arsenal against Kharkiv, it is the banderols that the man fears the most.
If you take a closer look at the detailed technical specifications, you will find that they boast a very high operational speed, and accordingly, they are capable of carrying a significantly larger payload than you might expect. It really is quite impressive. And as far as I understand, it is currently very difficult to detect or, shoot them down.
The occupiers began using banderols en masse this year against the ports and food depots of Odessa, as well as residential buildings and critical infrastructure in the Kharkiv region. Since May, when the Russians struck for the first time in the Kharkiv region alone, according to the prosecutor's office, there have been 11 victims and 130 wounded. For instance, in July, during a strike on a Nova Poshta terminal in the suburbs, there were 4 victims and 20 wounded. And this is the shelling of Saltivka. 1 person died and dozens were injured. The Russians also used banderols during the massive attacks on the capital. Spartak Borisenko, a prosecutor investigating war crimes, explains, after banderol shelling, the consequences are usually large-scale because the weight of the warhead is up to 150 kilograms. This is more than that of the Shaheds, and it is high explosive fragmentation.
They designed it specifically for the greatest possible harm to civilians, specifically in the warhead. During the inspection of the scene as a result of the strike, we found shrapnel, which scatters up to 500 meters from the impact.
And in approximately a third of such attack cases, the air raid siren did not go off at all because the missile's flight path was not detected.
This is purely terror against the civilian population. They use them specifically during the day when most people are out on the street. Taking into account the specific features of this weapon, namely that it is undetectable by air defense systems, in 30% of the cases where strikes occurred, the civilian alert system was not even activated.
Banderols are called a hybrid of a missile, a drone, and even an aerial bomb. But the editor-in-chief of Defense Express, Oleg Katkov, says it is a small-sized cruise missile, smaller and slower than the Russian Kaliber or Kh-101. But it has an advantage. It is launched from a drone. And to strike with a banderol, it is not necessary to lift a strategic bomber into the sky, and the flight range of up to 500 kilometers allows for firing from deep in the rear.
A cruise missile that can be launched from an Orion strike reconnaissance UAV. This is currently considered their primary carrier. The Orion can carry one such cruise missile. They can also be launched from helicopters, in particular from the Mi-28, and most likely they can already be launched, or at least the RF is moving in this direction, from ground-based launchers.
The banderol flies at a speed of up to 500 kilometers per hour and can descend to less than 200 meters, which makes it harder to spot in time. And a year ago, the occupiers presented ground-based launchers. They are mobile, arrive at the position, fire and flee. This will allow the Russians to launch banderols en masse.
There are reports that 8 banderols have already arrived simultaneously. And this, of course, well, it really makes one stop and wonder whether the enemy actually has the logistical capability to lift 8 of these Orions at the very same time. It is quite a significant question.
According to the GUR, the Russians can produce up to 80 such missiles every month. They point to the widespread use of foreign, primarily Chinese components. This makes production cheaper compared to large cruise missiles.
To produce such devices, you don't need some kind of specialized factory. It's enough to set up this production at any Wildberries warehouse, install a few 3D CNC machines, and conditionally glue the bodies together and assemble them from Chinese components because the engine is Chinese, the camera is Chinese, and the flight controller is Chinese.
To guide the banderol, it uses satellite navigation, and if the signal is lost, it can continue moving along the preset route. Such an autonomous navigation module was found by GUR specialists among the missile's components. And to detect the banderol itself in flight, one needs to be able to see targets at low altitudes. It is precisely this kind of radar field that Ukraine currently lacks.
in order to detect such threats, theoretically, as soon as they enter Ukrainian territory, we need to build a low-altitude radar field that will allow us to detect any aerial target, regardless of when it was launched.
The banderole can be shot down. There are confirmed interceptions. The problem is the price, experts say. For a jet-powered target, you need classic air defense systems or air-to-air missiles. Russia, meanwhile, is trying to repeat what it has already done with the Shaheds, turn a relatively cheap weapon into a mass-produced one. Now, Ukraine's task is to find a cheap countermeasure. Tetiana Dotsiak, Oleksandr Mironiuk, Fakti, ICTV, United News.